Hey, everybody. So today we're going to be getting into our triangle proofs. The first big thing I need you guys to copy down are all of the different reasons we're going to be using as we go through these proofs. Okay, so on the notes that we took the algebra proof reasons, you can go ahead and add this information to it. All right, so take a minute, get all of this. It's really important, and then we'll get into doing some problems. All right, so just to kind of skim down these and give you an idea of what these all mean here, this first one called the reflexive property. Okay, basically, whenever we have two triangles sharing either a side length or an angle, that's going to be using the reflexive property. Okay, the majority of the time, we'll see them share a side length, like right here. All right, and if that happens, we'll say, all right, reflexive property is the reason. Okay, next, vertical angles. We see these all the times. That's going to be one of our reasons as we go through. Next thing, definition of midpoint. If we're ever given a midpoint, all right, and it cuts something into two congruent sides, that's definition of midpoint. Okay, similar to that, definition of bisect is when something is being bisected into two congruent halves. Okay, just a little reminder, sometimes it's an angle being bisected, and sometimes it's a segment that's being bisected. All right, but either way, we would use that reason. Okay, the next two reasons kind of come as a pair. Okay, and that's why I have this little arrow right here. All right, definition of perpendicular. If we're ever told we have two perpendicular lines, the reason why we then create right angles is because the definition of perpendicular. And then following that up, those two right angles would be considered congruent. Okay, and that's this next reason all right angles are congruent. Okay, so these will always come as a pair when you use them. Okay, last two, a linear pair. That's another thing we're familiar with. Two angles that make a straight flat line are a linear pair. And last thing, alternate interior angles. All right, we will often see parallel lines cut by a transversal. And a lot of the times, the congruent angles that we'll get is alternate interior angles, though ever so often we'll see some of the other ones show up, like corresponding angles. So just kind of look out for that whenever you're given parallel lines. Okay, so this is a lot of information, but we'll break it down and you'll see, what all of this means when we get into an example. All right, one thing to know, once we get to the very end of our proof, our very last reason is going to be one of our triangle congruence theorems. Okay, ultimately, that's what we're doing. We're proving that two triangles are congruent, and we're finding all of the missing information on these triangles. Okay, or in other words, the three pieces of information. Okay, that will be all of the statements, all of the steps to our proofs. And then at the very end, our last reason will be one of these, depending on the information we have. Okay, cool. So let's get into it, and let's take a look at number one. Okay, so first thing, on this worksheet, all of the statements are given to us. They're that is not always the case when it comes to proofs. You guys will see eventually we will have problems that are not giving us the statements, and we'll have to kind of fill them in. Okay, but for now, it's going to be given to us. Okay, so focusing on the reasons here. First thing they're telling us, segment AB is congruent to segment CD. All right, why do we know that? What is the reason? Well, if you guys look up here, they are giving us some information. Okay, and one of the things they're telling us is just that. Segment AB is congruent to segment CD. The reason why we know that, it's been given. Okay, here's maybe the most important part of these problems. When you have, information, when you figure something out, put that information onto your triangles. All right, I'm going to show that segment AD, this segment here, is congruent to segment CD. Okay, go ahead and put those congruent bars through it. Okay, next thing is that our statement is that segment AC is congruent to segment DB. All right, again, that is given to us. All right, so that is our next reason for this to exist. It's because we were told. All right, and up here, let's go ahead and show that segment AC is congruent to segment DB. Okay, as far as given information, that's all they tell us. The rest of this we need to find on our own. So I'm looking at these triangles. I'm thinking, all right, I have two pieces of information. I need one more missing piece of information. You guys might notice these triangles share a side length. That thing is congruent to itself. Okay, and that is our next statement. Segment CB is congruent to segment CB. All right, anytime we use that, just a reminder, that is what's called the reflexive property. Okay, that is our reason. All right, so reflexive property. Okay, you know you're on your final step of these proofs when you get the three pieces of information onto your triangles. That's why it's so important to put it onto your triangles. And also the reason why it's important is now we know which of our triangle congruence theorems we're using. We have three congruent sides on both these triangles. The reason why the two triangles are congruent is because of side, side, side. Okay. And that right there is, the process. This is one of the more simple problems, but that really is what it's all about. We're just trying to get the three pieces of information so we can pick which triangle congruence theorem is being used. That's ultimately what this is all about. Okay, cool. So let's try another. Take a look at number 2. Okay, first things first, they're giving us this information. AC is congruent to EC. There's our first statement. The reason why we know that, it's given. All right, let's show that on our triangles. AC is this side length, congruent to EC, this side length. Okay, next thing, they're giving us another piece of given information. That's our next statement. BC is congruent to DC. The reason why we know that, it's been given. All right, let's show that on our triangles. Segment BC is congruent to segment DC. All right, again, that's all our given information. The rest of it we need to figure out on our own, right? We have two pieces of information. We need a third thing. And hopefully you guys are noticing we have some vertical angles, all right? So we know that this angle is congruent to this angle, right? And if you guys notice, that is our next statement. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Why do we know that? Because vertical angles. Okay. All right. Last thing. Now we can say our two triangles are congruent. Okay. Which triangle congruence theorem is being used? Well, hopefully you notice we have two sides and an angle in between. That is side, angle, side. Okay. So with that, I'm going to have you guys try out a couple of these on your own. Numbers 3 and number 4, I'm going to have you try out. Okay. So start with number 3 there. Okay, go through. It's a lot like the other two problems, so use those as a guide if you need to, and then we'll go over it. Okay, so I'm going to do this kind of quick, but first thing, angle D is congruent to angle B. All right, that's our first statement. The reason why we know that, it's been given. Okay, let's show that on this. Angle B is congruent to angle D. Okay, next thing, angle ACB is congruent to angle CAD. All right, there's our statement, our next statement here. Why do we know that? It's been given. All right, let's show that on our triangles. Just a little reminder, angle ACD starts at A, goes around C to D. That's angle ACD. Okay, so this thing is telling us that this angle, which by the way, I'm going to use two arcs, is congruent to angle CAD, which is this one right here. All right, so these are my congruent angles. Right, that's all my given information. I've got two pieces of information. I need a third thing. These triangles, they have a shared side length. We know that AC is congruent to AC. Okay, that's our next statement. The reason why we know that, this is called the reflexive property. Okay, now that we have our three pieces of information, we know we're at our final step. We can now say the two triangles are congruent. The reason why they're congruent, it looks like we have two angles and a side, not in between the angles. This is angle, angle, side. All right, let's check out the other one. All right, so first thing, angle B is congruent to angle D. There's our statement. Why do we know? It's been given. Okay, let's go ahead and show. There's angle B. There's angle D. Okay, next thing, segment or side BC is congruent to segment DC. So BC is congruent to DC. Why do we know that? It's been given. All right, let's go ahead and show it. Here's side length BC. Here's side length DC. right? That's all we've been told. Now we need to find some more information on our own. Hopefully you guys notice we have some vertical angles here. We know this angle is congruent to this angle, okay? Or angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. There's our next statement. The reason why is because they're vertical angles. Okay, last thing. Now we have our 3 pieces of information. Now we can say our triangles are congruent, and the reason why is because of angle, side, angle. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to do a few more examples with you, but if you are good on your triangle congruence theorems, if you can look at this and easily go, oh yeah, angle, side, angle, everything else I don't think is, terribly difficult, right? But yeah, let's look at some problems that do some stuff that is a little bit more interesting. Take a skip past 5. Let's take a look at number 6. Okay, so first thing, where you'll start on all these problems, if it wasn't obvious already, is with your first piece of given information. Okay, they're saying that AD is perpendicular to BC. Remember, this is the symbol for perpendicular. All right, so why do we know that? They told us it, it's been given. Okay, but now we need to use this information, to our advantage. We need to get some information onto our triangles. So they're saying that AD, this line, is perpendicular to BC. All right. Well, if they're perpendicular, we know that they touch at a 90-degree angle. Not only is this a right angle, but angle 2 is also a right angle. All right. And if you notice, that is our very next statement. Angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles. All right. Why do we know that though? Okay. That has not been given to us. Why do we know that? Well, that is the definition of perpendicular. All right. So that's our next reason. I'm going to shorten it to just a DEF for definition of, and then we'll shorten perpendicular to perp. Okay, remember what I said. Definition of perpendicular is always followed by all right angles are congruent. If you guys take a look at the next statement, we are then saying that, all right, that means angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Yeah, why do we know that? Because all right angles are congruent. So that's our next thing. So we'll shorten this to right angles. We'll say arc and then use the symbol for congruent. All right. So that's a little strange. That took some effort out of us. All right. But just know anytime you get perpendicular lines, you're going to be followed by these 2 reasons. Okay. Just kind of get used to thinking that way. Okay. So moving on, we have some more given information. We have segment BC bisecting an angle. All right. So there's our next statement. Why do we know that? It's been given to us. All right. This is another statement that we can get some more information out of. Okay. What does it mean when 2 angles are bisected? What do we get out of it? Okay. Well, let's take a look. They're saying that BC, this segment right here, is bisecting angle ACD. That's this angle. All right. So this angle is being bisected. What does that mean? It means it's being cut into 2 congruent halves. That this angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. All right. And if you notice, that is our next statement. All right. Why do we know that? Well, if we have something being bisected, our following reason will always be definition of bisect. Okay. So yeah, angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Why do we know that? It's the definition of bisect. That's what it means for 2 things to be bisected. Okay, so there's all my given information. Now I'm taking a look and I'm noticing, all right, I need one more piece of information on this thing. And yeah, these do have a shared side length. All right, so that thing's congruent to itself, or in other words, BC is congruent to BC. There's our next statement. Okay, why do we know that? Reflexive property. Okay, last thing. Now we can finally say our triangles are congruent. The reason why? 2 angles and a side length in between. Angle, side, angle. Okay. All right, so let's keep pushing along. There's a few examples I want to go over. So let's take a look at number 7. All right. First things first, take a look at your first piece of given information. They're telling us we have two congruent angles. All right, there's our first statement. Why do we know that? Because it's been given. Okay. On our triangles, let's highlight those two congruent angles. Angles DAC is this angle right here. Okay, so this one is congruent to angle BCA, which is this one. All right, that's all we can get out of that information. Moving along. Next thing they're telling us, parallel lines. Okay, AB is parallel to DC. All right, there's our statement. Why do we know that? It's been given. All right, when we have parallel lines, we know we can get some additional information out of those. Okay, so let me point out. They're saying that side AB is parallel to side DC. All right, here's what we need to notice. We have a transversal cutting over these lines. All right, and angles 1 and angle 2 are alternate interior angles. And that means they're congruent because all alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, so those are congruent to one another. And you can see that is our very next statement. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Why do we know that? Because they're alternate interior angles. Okay, that's all our given information. I need one more piece of information. Again, you guys can see they're sharing a side length here. So we can say AC is congruent to AC. There's our next statement. Why? Anytime they share a side or an angle, reflexive property. Okay, and let's show that on our triangles. Okay, last thing, now we can say our triangles are congruent. And if you guys notice the information, we have an angle, a side, and an angle. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to see the patterns on these. They are tricky. I am going to have you guys try out one next problem on your own. If you would skip and take a look at number 10, I'm going to have you deal with this problem that also has some parallel lines. So it's a lot like that last one you guys did. All right, so try this one out on your own, and then we'll have one more example. Okay, so let's go through this pretty quick. BC is congruent to AD. There's our first statement that's been given to us. Okay, let's go ahead and show it. Here's side length BC. Here's side length AD. All right, there's nothing else we can do that. So moving on, we have this next given statement. BC is parallel to AD. All right, okay, that is our next statement. All right, why do we know that? It's been given to us. All right, we have parallel lines though. So let me just kind of highlight them. There are my parallel lines. We know we can get some more information out of this. All right, I'm taking a look at my angles here, and that angles 1 and 2 are alternate interior angles. We know this is congruent to this. Okay, that's our next statement, and the reason why is because they're alternate interior angles. Okay, I need one more piece of information, right? I have a side and an angle. I need one more thing. We have a shared side length. That thing's congruent to itself. BD is congruent to BD. And that, again, is called the reflexive property. Okay, taking a look at our information here. We have two sides and an angle in between. That is side, angle, side. All right. Something you might have thought to yourself. These were alternate interior angles. These were also alternate interior angles. We could have also said these blue angles were congruent, and potentially we could have said, angle, angle, side. All right. That could have been another way of going through this problem. But the reason why I did what I did is because I was following the statements that they gave us here. Okay. But sometimes there's multiple, ways through these proofs, as long as you can get 3 pieces of information. Okay. All right. So last thing I want to do with you guys, I know this is kind of a long one. Let's take a look at number 12 together. Okay. This one does something a little strange. So first thing, they're giving us a couple congruent side lengths. BC is congruent to EC. Okay. We know that because it's given. Okay. Let's go ahead and show that. BC is this side length congruent to EC, this one. All right. They're also telling us that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. All right. So there's our next statement. Why do we know that? It's been given. Okay. So here's angle 1. Here's angle 4. All right. That's all the information we're given. All right. So now we need to figure out some more stuff on our own. All right. If you guys take a look at this next statement, angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. Okay. This is what we kind of need to realize on the next step, or at least they're hoping we do, that these angles are congruent. All right. Here's the rationale behind it. These two angles are a linear pair. They add to 180. Okay. These two angles are a linear pair. They add to 180. All right. Since angles 1 and 4 are congruent, that means angles 2 and 3 also must be congruent for them to, both add to 180. All right. So that's why we can say this angle is congruent to this angle. Okay. So angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. The reason why is because they were linear pairs. Okay. So there's that one reason we haven't seen yet. All right, so yeah, that one's a little strange, but that's the idea on that. Okay, from here, if you guys notice, we just have one congruent side. Sorry, let's get an overlap there. We have one side and one angle on these triangles. This outside angle doesn't help us use one of our triangle congruence theorems. We have to ignore that. We need one more piece of information. And hopefully you're noticing, vertical angles. Okay, so angle C. All right, which by the way, I just called that angle C. Can't actually call it angle C. Okay, to be more specific, I would have to call the one on the left angle ACB, and then the one on the right angle DCE. All right, and that's what we have right here. Those angles are congruent. Why is that? They're vertical angles. Okay, there's our three pieces of information. I have an angle, a side, and an angle. Okay, so yeah, these proofs, these reasons, it's not the easiest thing we've ever done in this class, but if you've been keeping up and you're feeling good about triangle congruence and vertical angles and stuff like that, you'll eventually get these. So I'm gonna have you guys try out the rest of them on this worksheet. It's kind of, you can consider it the assignment for the day, and then we'll go from there. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. See ya.